fishermen in Lassie and Shuko, people who, it says, to whom it may concern, I, the undersigned, am in full support of Mr. Ryan Cleary and his efforts to start up a new union to represent the fishermen of Newfoundland and Labrador. I thank you for that, Keith. I know a lot of people said that they couldn't make it, so I think the turnout here, we needed a turnout that was pretty much blocked to the rafters, and that's pretty much what we got, so thank you very much for coming out. A lady that I met on the way in, her name is Stella Mailman, and she's from Port au Choix. And Stella made it a point to come over to me when I was standing up in the back, and she said she was around years ago when Richard Cashin and Des McGraw started up the Fishermen's Union back in the day, and she said she wanted to make it a point to be here today because she wanted to see history repeat itself again. So hopefully that's what this will be. It will be history repeating itself. So the way this is going to work is I've got a few remarks I want to give. I want to give an overview of why we're here today, and then I'm going to pass it over to Jason Sullivan. Jason is from Bay Bulls, and I want to pass it over after that to Richard Gillett, who's from Twillingate. Now we pretty much are the three ringleaders in terms of pushing forward and making this happen. So thanks to the boys too, and we'll each have a few words, and then after that we got a mic in the back. And what we're going to do is we're going to open the mic, and anybody who has anything to say, we're going to encourage you to get up and say it. So, this is the first of two meetings that we have scheduled. The second meeting is tomorrow, and that meeting is in Clarenville, and it's at 3 p.m. So, if you have any friends on the East Coast that we haven't contacted, please urge them to come tomorrow to the Clarenville Inn, and that's going to be at 3 o'clock until 6 o'clock. So, these meetings are meant to gauge the interest of fish harvesters in a new union specifically for fish harvesters. A new union that we have named Fish NL. Fish NL stands for Federation of Independent Sea Harvesters of Newfoundland and Labrador. Fish NL. I think it's got a real ring to it. Because the FFAW is not cutting it. Because the FFAW has lost its way and left you, fish harvesters, behind. The FFAW has morphed from a union into a corporation more interested in feeding itself than representing the best interests of its membership. There are more conflicts of interest surrounding the FFAW than you can shake a stick at. It's a wonder Dave Decker can navigate his way to work in the morning. There are more conflicts of interest than... Actually, it's a wonder Dave Decker can put both legs in the same pair of pants, let alone serve as the FFAW Secretary-Treasurer. Again, there are that many conflicts. Now, there's the age-old conflict of interest you've all heard about surrounding the question of how the FFAW can represent fishermen, can represent plant workers, can represent trawlermen at the same time. Now, that conflict has been around since day one. But there are more recent conflicts since the moratorium and the packages that came with it, like NCART and tags. This is one of the biggest conflicts. On the one hand, the FFAW is responsible for holding the Government of Canada and DFO to account for day-to-day management decisions and overall policy direction. That's what they're responsible for. On the other hand, the FFAW is paid untold millions of dollars a year from federal and provincial government departments and agencies to administer fisheries programs. Now, how can the FFAW represent your best interest with Ottawa, which governs the harvesting sector, when Ottawa is funding the union? How can it do that? From my perspective, it can't do that. Now, Oz Tucker is here from Reef Service. I spoke with him this morning. He showed me a petition. Oz showed me a petition that he circulated last year. The petition is signed by 200 licensed fishermen, about 200. And that petition called for an investigation into the FFAW, where it's so closely involved with DFO. Now, from our perspective, we asked the Federal Auditor General of Canada and the Canadian Labour Congress, which governs most big unions in the country, we asked to do an investigation into the federal money that's going into the FFAW. The Auditor General of Canada said no and referred our concerns to auditors with DFO, and the Canadian Labour Congress did not respond to our concerns whatsoever. Now, in regards to that conflict, normal checks and balances that accompany a regular union management dynamic can be compromised, and they are compromised when funds change hands between the union and between government. More than that, faith in the FFAW has been undermined. There is no trust. That trust is gone. Now, this showing in this room, the turnout in this room shows that. It's been 24 years since the Northern Cod Moratorium, and the biggest change in federal fisheries policy in a generation has been the elimination of the double hook jigger. Make no mistake, the elimination of LIFO in the shrimp fishery was a partial success, but that's one success against too many failures to count. Over the last few months, we've spoken to fishermen from one end of this province to the other, and there are a couple of common themes that I'm going to go through. The first is consultation. There is no consultation, or precious little. The FFAW does not ask fish harvesters. He does not ask you for input. The FFAW tells fish harvesters how it's going to be. What little consultation takes place is window dressing. It's a formality, and it's after the fact, just to say that consultation took place. Scallop harvesters from the Great Northern Peninsula and Southern Labrador know all about consultation, or lack of consultation. Now, that's why they were forced to take their own union to the Supreme Court of Newfoundland, and they won over a compensation fund for last fishing ground in the Strait of Belle Isle. At that trial that Jason attended, you attended every day of that trial, it was made clear that the union sent draft proposals to NALCOR in August and September of 2012, but didn't ask fishermen for permission to negotiate until May of 2013. But the judge concluded that the union failed in its responsibility to the fishermen. The union failed in its responsibility to fishermen. Thanks, Richard. We got two cars that need to be moved, or they're going to be towed. One is a Silverado, red pickup, CWP 160, and the other is a black CRV Honda HTJ 543.
Sweet, I don't lose my parking spot.
That's right now. The church across the road, there's parking spaces there, so if anybody's looking there. So let me repeat that. The judge concluded that the union failed in its responsibility to fishermen. That pretty much sums up where we are today with the FFAW. To make matters worse, if that wasn't enough of an insult, the FFAW then charged fishermen from the Great Northern Peninsula and Southern Labrador almost $400,000 in a negotiation fee. Now, I could be mistaken, or maybe I'm naive, but isn't that what union dues are for? I would say that's exactly what union dues are for. There's been unrest in the fishing industry for a generation. I heard it as a journalist going back to 1991, the year before the Northern Cod Moratorium. I covered fisheries for the Telegram. A lot of the stories were picked up by the Western Star. That unrest, the unrest has been around since the collapse of Northern Cod fishery in 1992, but it's been around well before that. The unrest today, from my perspective, is different. It's escalated, and it's pretty well universal, with more than a hint of desperation. The fishermen that we speak to, they give it about 5 years before they're done. Too many fishermen are at the breaking point with nothing to lose. Fishermen are at the breaking point in terms of their ability to make a living from the sea. Quotas are down, and government and union fees are constantly up. I mentioned consultation being a huge issue. Transparency is another huge issue with the FFAW. Again, there's no consultation and there's no transparency. How much money is going into the union? How much government money is going into the union? And from what other sources? And where is all of that money being spent? They are key questions that have no answers. Now, just last week it was learned that an FFAW-controlled company responsible for overseeing the province-wide dockside monitoring program was paid. It paid the union, it paid the FFAW almost $6 million over 10 years for shrimp grading and crab research fees. Now, that's even though the Fish Harvesters Resource Center, or FRC as you know it, is a not-for-profit company created in 1993 strictly to verify fish landings. So why is the FRC paying millions to the FFAW for shrimp grading and crab research, tasks that fall outside of the jurisdiction of the FRC's mandate? I was saying to Jason today, maybe Revenue Canada should take a look at whether the FRC is really a non-profit organization. Somebody needs to look into it. Keep in mind that the bulk of the FRC's revenue comes from fishermen, like I said, although it also comes from places like, or it has come from places like ACOA. And the fishermen, you guys are charged a fee for dockside monitoring based on species and catch. Now the news that the FRC was paying so much money over 10 years to the FFAW, it raises the question of whether fishermen have been overcharged for dockside monitoring, which is mandatory, as you know, as a condition of licensing. The FFAW has yet to respond to any of the charges that we've leveled in the past few weeks. They haven't responded to any charges. Actually, Keith Sullivan was asked on Open Line. Keith Sullivan was on Open Line last week, and he was asked about the millions of dollars that were paid by the FRC to the FFAW, and what Sullivan said was those funds were more or less spent on travel. Now, I don't know if David Decker has a helicopter on standby with the meter running, but that's a lot of money to be spent on travel. Now, I want to return to conflict of interest for a minute. This has been a long-standing sore point with me as a former journalist, and I know it's a long-standing sore point with a lot of people in this room, and it has to do with the awarding of that controversial crab quota back in the mid-1990s to a company with extremely close ties to the FFAW. All I have to say is union though, and everybody knows what I'm talking about. Now, just how close those union ties are to the FFAW was only learned in recent months through a federal access to information request filed by Jason Sullivan. Thank you very much for that. The union has always denied any connection with that crab quota. They have no connection. But what the ATIP showed was that there was an extremely close connection. The then vice president of the FFAW's deep sea sector wrote to DFO in 1995, and he asked that primary access to the developing offshore crab fishery be given to struggling offshore trawlermen. Now the trawlermen didn't get that quota in 1995. So what did Chess Cribb do? He wrote again the next year asking for a snow crab quota, but that time he asked, the second time he asked, not as the VP of the FFAW's deep sea sector, but as president of a private company called Offshore Fish Resource Harvesters, and he got the crab quota. That company initially presented itself to DFO as a cooperative, but the description would appear to be a misrepresentation. The company's crab quota has been renewed every year since 1996, and profits over that time would be in the millions of dollars. Where have those profits gone? Does anybody in this room know where those profits have gone? Nobody knows. The FFAW knows, the company knows, but you don't know. And that company was supposed to be a cooperative. I have been contacted by months by fishermen around the province who've asked me to investigate whether they could break away from the FFAW and form their own union. I've been contacted by fishermen all around the province, fishermen who weren't talking to each other. They just contacted me. They know I've had feelings about the FFAW and strong opinions about the FFAW in the past. And I've been contacted again by fishermen who didn't know about each other, but they were contacting me from everywhere. And the fishermen are in, some of the fishermen are in this room, they know who they are. Fishermen want a union for fish harvesters only. A union whose function is not fisheries administration, a union whose function is not fisheries management. Fishermen want a union solely responsible for representing the best interests of its membership. I don't think that that's too much to ask. A union responsible, this is key for me too, a union responsible for ensuring the government of Canada lives up to its obligations with the fisheries that are outlined under the terms of union. The FFAW has not been doing that. They've not been doing it with NAFO, the Northwest Atlantic Fisheries Organization. They haven't been doing it, period. The union should be checking, keeping DFO in check. It hasn't been doing its job. Is that because they get all this money from the federal government? Is that why? Is that what makes the FFAW quiet in terms of so many issues? I would say it's a safe bet. Fishermen have complained for years about the FFAW. Before I get to that, I've consulted with the Labor Relations Board about forming a separate union. The Labor Relations Board in St. John's, I've gone in, I've met with their officials, I've reviewed their files about the formation of the FFAW, about the FFAW breaking away from the UFCW. I understand how they broke away. The question is this: is it possible for fishermen to break away from the FFAW? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. But I have a question for you. Are you happy with the status quo? Are you guys happy with how things are now?
No.
No? Is there anybody who is? Is there anybody who is? Because I tell you what, when we open up this mic, it's not just people who have things negative to say or coming down on the FFAW. We want, if you've got anything to say, you're more than welcome to say it here. But I think most of the sentiment today is going to be against the FFAW. From my perspective, if you want to see a future for yourself, if you want to see a future for the industry, and if you want to see a future for your children, then it's important when we get off the ground that you sign up for FishNL. Again, I can't stress enough, it's time to fish or cut bait. Now, here's what's going to happen. Here's the process. So we got two meetings. The first meeting is right here today, and what we said is if we don't see a turnout, we move forward. But I tell you what we see here today, we see the turnout. And I'm hoping that tomorrow at the meeting in Clarenville, we see an equal turnout. Because the message is loud and clear. If today's meeting had been half full, we would have been dead in the water. But this kind of turnout means that we move forward. So the next step after we have the meeting in Clarenville is we take FishNL, the Federation of Independent Sea Harvesters, and we make it official. We have an AGM, an annual general meeting, in someplace central like Grand Falls, Windsor, or whatever, and we form FishNL. We make it a official with a constitution and bylaws and the whole 9 yards. Once we do that, once that's formalized, then we can go out and we can ask fishermen to sign cards saying that you want to be part of our association. There's a timeline on that, and the timeline works like this. When we go to the Labor Relations Board and we submit an application for certification, they'll only accept names on cards that were submitted 90 days before the application. 90 days. Although we can apply to get up to 180 days, but we have to apply and we have to see how that works out. But the precedent has been set in the past. If we get 50 plus 1 as a result of the card sign-ups, if we get 50 plus 1, then what happens is the Labor Relations Board carries out its own vote. That means that fishermen right across the province will be asked to vote on whether or not they want representation from FishNL or if they want representation from, to stay with representation from the FFAW. And the result of that vote will determine where we go from here. But I tell you what, you've got a determined bunch in front of you here today. We know that the fishery is broken. We know that the union is not working for fishery. We know that beyond a shadow of a doubt. And we are determined to see this through. And it's going to be an uphill battle. It's going to be a monumental challenge. Because right off the bat, you've got the FFAW, which is organized. It has its own list of fishermen. We don't have a list. I'm sure when we go ask the FFAW for the list of members, they're not going to hand it right over. So we've got to come up, that's why we asked you to, if you haven't signed, when you came in, if you haven't signed your name and your address and your phone, your contact information, please do before you leave. Because when we're off to the races, we're going to need to contact every single person in this room to say, we need you to sign cards. We need you to go out to your neighbor and sign cards. We need everybody to sign cards to move forward. So, our next speaker, before we open up the floor, and then Richard will speak, is Jason Sullivan from Bay Bulls.
You said 50 plus 1. Is that 50% plus 1 or 50 equal plus 1?
It's 50% plus 1.
You've got to have 50% of all.
That's right. That's right. Of FFAW members. Yeah. If we get 50 plus 1, then the Labor Relations Board, which will review the cards to make sure they're all legitimate, then the Labor Relations Board will go out and do their own vote. And that vote will ultimately decide where we go. Jason Sullivan from Bay Bulls.
Most people ever spoke from front before, so there's some seats up here in the front that anyone wants to sit down and like. Most of you might know me from Facebook and the group there. Started a group a little over a year ago, and there's about 1,200 people on it now. And I guess I just started it to get the discussion going on what's going on. And you know, there's always, as long as I can remember, I'm not that old, but as long as I've been going to meetings, I mean, there's been people begging the union to let outside buyers in, all sorts of different things, and it seems like it goes on deaf ears. So I started the group with the hope that we could get some discussion going, and I always led back to the one thing: we just weren't working for us. The union wasn't working for us. So, you know, I'll be honest, I'm the first guy that approached him. There's no one, he didn't approach anyone. The union are going to spin this that, you know, Ryan's looking for a job or blah, blah, blah. But I mean, look what we're doing here. This is not going to be easy. And I mean, if you're looking for a job, this will be the last place you do. So,
Jason,
you know,
speak up a bit. They can't hear you.
yeah, sorry. So anyway, I'm glad that we finally got it going here, and I know you might hear my stomach growling. I'm too nervous to eat this morning, so
Don't be nervous.
no,
Don't be nervous.
but I can't tell you. I mean, I've always been proud to be a fisherman. I mean, you know, sometimes when you're younger and you're always told to go to school and you know you should do something else and spend your life fighting and whatever. But you know, fighting's nearly over. Sick and fight. We're not fighting with anyone. We're union. And like I said, I've always been proud. I've never been prouder than this moment right now. I mean, I see a lot of good people. I don't know many, but I've, you know, but Jesus Christ, was this is amazing. So anyway, I'll get into the dirt that everyone's here to listen to. The thing about moderating a forum and everything else, you hear from a lot of different people through private messages and stuff, and you hear the stories and you hear what's going on and all sorts of different things. I mean, Ryan brought up the union vote. They always deny they didn't own the union vote. We don't own the union vote. No, we don't own it. Just, you know, there was union flags painted all over, but no, they don't own her. So anyway, they painted over the flags, and it had to go away. They got 500 tons of crab. That's 1.2 million over a year they used to catch. And you know, this is in an area that competes directly with independent harvesters like yourselves. That area now is in dire straits. There's going to be huge cuts there. I'm talking maybe 80%. You know, it's a special interest quota that we know there's something going on there. We don't know where exactly the money is going, but we know there's ties. So we've seen it from the active request. But if they were so adamant to saying that they don't own the union vote, why haven't they started a campaign to say the first 500 ton cut in 3N200 is going to come from the union vote? The independent harvesters should not be punished because they want to keep filling their coffers. The first 500 tons should come directly from that special interest quota. That should come out of it. I mean, we want to benefit thousands of harvesters instead of these 10 or 15 guys that you're dealing with. So, I mean, it's a simple one. If you don't own it, come out and fight against it. Everyone says fishermen are always complaining. The union don't set the rules. No, but DFO only listens to the union. stuff. So for some reason, they last 2 scallop beds. The last 2 out of the 3 scallop beds. So now there's other species they've been fishing are kind of in decline, or whatever effect may be, and they're fishing scallop again. They only have 1 bed left. So the union never supported them in their fight. They want to get back access to those beds again. The union never supported them. They're down by themselves, shutting down plants and doing whatever, and the union hanging up their face when they call in. It'll lead you to believe, or me to believe anyway, I think I'm a little bit smart and the figure scatter thing out, that DFO doesn't take ground on no one. You can ask the guys from the scallop fleet in the Northern Peninsula, you have to sign a paper saying you're going to relinquish those grounds or whatever it might be. Those grounds, those scallop bed went to the offshore. They took them on the inshore guys, give them to the offshore factory, mostly based out of Nova Scotia. There's no one in this room will tell me that that wasn't a trade for processing in Grand Bank. Nobody. I know, in my heart of hearts, that they traded that. They sold out the inshore fishermen for plant jobs, and that's not right. That is not right. They should be fighting for us. Therein lies one of the major problems. You cannot serve 2 masters. You cannot. I mean, these rumors are going around a while now. They never have once answered a question about it. Why won't they comment on it? Is it because they done something wrong? Well, it certainly make you think so. Get back to Treepace again. Those poor guys they're after having it hard. This year, I think the end of July, around that time, Judy Foote and LeBlanc and them came down to St. John's. And they met with Nick Urban and Nelson Bossy was there. You know, a few of the head guys